Hi, and welcome. We're so excited that you chose to join us today. And we hope that this message will inspire you to live the life that God designed you to live. For this message or others like it, you can go to our website or you can find us on our YouTube channel. Now sit back, relax, enjoy this message.
From the Bible with you. I'm here in Psalms 127 and verse 1. It says here, unless the Lord builds a house, the builder's work is useless.
Unless the Lord protects a city, sentries do no good. It says that in the Old Testament. I'll find it here in the New Testament. Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and he says this in 1 Corinthians 3, in verse 6 and 7. I'm reading from the Living Bible here. Verse 6 of 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says, my work was to plant the seed in your hearts, and Apollos' work was to water it. But it was God, not we, who made the garden grow in your hearts. The person who does the planting or watering isn't very important. But God is important because He is the one who makes things grow. In the King James Bible, it says, it's God who gives the increase. God gives the increase. It doesn't matter if I'm talking about your personal life, or in your family, or in a nation. It's God that gives the increase. Whenever somebody tells you, let's move God out of the public square, or let's not talk as much about God, what they're really saying is, come and join us in poverty. Because increase only comes from God. You know, I want to tell you a story of how this has worked in our nation. You know, in 1606, the first Europeans came to the mainland of the United States. You know, prior to that time, why Spanish people had come to around the Caribbean, they even got up into Florida. And French people got up into Canada. But as far as what we call the United States right now, people from England came to the United States in 1606. And it's important that those people came to our mainland. What was unique about them is that for the first time in human history, just think 5,600 years of human history, common people had the Bible. The Word of God. You know, in the early church, you know, the Bible, the New Testament was finished in 100 A.D. And in some of the churches, you might have some handwritten scrolls. But as far as a church having a whole copy of the New Testament, that didn't happen. And then by 400 A.D., the Catholic Church, they thought that common people shouldn't have the Scripture, that they weren't educated enough to read Scripture. So then the church held the Bible away from common people. Well, it's an interesting story what happened in England there, and there's not time to talk about that now. But these people, with a great price, had the Bible, and common people had it, and common people learned to read in England in the 1500s so that they could read the Bible. And so these people that came they landed where Virginia Beach would be right now, and they were people that had the Bible, and I don't know if it's because it was new to them or what, but they just thought that if the Bible said something, why they'd do it. You know, if they had a problem, they'd look in the Bible to see what God said about it, and then they'd do what God said to fix the problem. And so they landed in where Virginia Beach is right now in 1606. And the way they do, they come in a ship, a big ship, but you couldn't get that too close to the shore, or it would, get stuck in the sand. So they put out a little rowboat, and the three men that come on shore there were two pastors and a missionary. And they planted a cross there where Virginia Beach is, and they prayed, and they dedicated that spot to spreading the gospel around the entire earth to fulfill the Great Commission. If you went there today, that is a field of satellite dishes that is broadcasting the gospel around the earth, particularly to Muslim and communist China, North Korea even, and to children, most of all, as it goes around the world in the form of superbook cartoons. But that's there at Virginia Beach. But so those people, they settled there, and then for the next 100 years, they spent making 13 colonies along the eastern coast of our nation. And about the time 1700, when that changed, this is hard for us to understand. Common people had the Bible for like 150 years there, and the new birth was a revelation to them. I mean, they were finding this out. I know and here, man, everybody knows about being born again, it seems. But this was new to them, so it was a big deal to them. And preachers in the colonies, they had this vision of preaching to the new birth to people. But in the colonies there, their vision only went, transportation was a challenge, and that vision went about as far as the colony that they lived in. But there was a young man from England named George Whitefield, a powerful young preacher. He's 26 years old, and God gave him a vision that he should come over to the colonies and preach up and down all 13 colonies and preach this new birth. And people would get born again, so many of them, that they would be unified by this new birth, this new creation life, and this would become a nation, those 13 colonies, an independent nation, and that nation would spread the gospel around the world to fulfill the Great Commission. So George Whitefield came over here, and he started preaching. And everything about his ministry was just very supernatural. Like, he would preach in an open field, and 20,000 people would come and hear him, but everybody heard his voice without a microphone, a quarter of a mile away. And they heard his voice, and they responded. Man, people took this message of being born again, and they got saved. But for him, he'd preach hours a day like that, and then he'd ride horseback all night long, sleep while he's riding horses, to get to where he was going, because he had up and down the 13 colonies. Nobody thought that could even be done, And as he did that, he was a young man, he had a weak heart, and he died while he was preaching. And in the place where he died, and this is all documented, they took him to an elderly black woman there that they called a prophetess, and she prayed over him. He came back to life, and he preached 5 more tours in the United States, 30 years. And we call that the First Great Awakening. He died at 56, again while he was preaching, and went to heaven. But by that time, the vision was fulfilled. There were so many people that were born again that these people in the colonies saw themselves as a different breed of people. New creation people. And the laws of England were repressive to their new creation life. And so they separated from that country. And in our Declaration of Independence, just think now, 1776, so almost 5,800 years of human history, and the first time in all those years, somebody thought that our rights, our human rights, came from God. All the time before, they'd always come from the government. You got your rights from the government, so then you looked to the government. You depended on the government for your rights, but this was totally unique in our Declaration of Independence. We had inseparable rights. You couldn't separate a person from these rights that came from God. And our country was totally unique. And it even went on. In no government document before or since did anybody ever dream that there could be a pursuit of happiness. That people could actually try to be happy. That's totally unique to our nation. So they separated from England. About 13 years later, they made a constitution. And in our constitution, the people that wrote that, 75% of the lines in our Constitution, the writers had a Bible reference to say, well, that's why that line is there. That's what that means. The other 25% was just general biblical principle. But see, these were a people that had the Bible and that looked to they thought that the Bible had the answer for the life of their family and the life of their nation. There was such a change. I'll give you a quote from Benjamin Franklin here about the First Great Awakening, because he was an adult before the Awakening and afterwards. And he said, before the Great Awakening, you could go through any village in the colonies at night and you'd hear the sounds of drunken men in the taverns. From the open windows of people's houses, you could hear husbands and wives arguing and children fighting. After the Great Awakening, 30 years later, any village you went to, he said, there were no drunken men. From the windows of the houses, you could hear families reading the Bible, praying, and singing hymns. It changed our people so much, the hearts of the people. And our Constitution. I mean, just think of this. It had all those Bible references. The three of the top people at the Constitutional Convention, James Madison, George Washington, and Benjamin Franklin, in giving a statement about the Constitution, they all had this line in their statement. This document was written by the finger of God, they said. So that's the way our nation started. And in those next years, we grew so fast. I mean, we prospered so much. We became an influential nation so fast that people from Europe came over here to see what was making that. Because we were quickly rising to become a dominant nation in the world. And they concluded, Pastor Steve mentioned this last week, Alexis de Tocqueville, it was the Christian character of the people. It was God that gave the increase. Okay, here. So that was about 1830, in the mid-30s there, and now we started a second Great Awakening. Because now we got the grandchildren of the people that had been in the First Great Awakening. And in the Second Great Awakening, this was mostly centered in the northeastern part of our country, because the South, they raised cotton, and they had slaves, and with the invention of the cotton gin, why the number of slaves in the South multiplied by 30 times by 1860. From 1800 to 1860, they had 30 times more slaves. So, man, they was thinking slavery, and they shut out the Great Awakening. But, man, in the Northeast, whole cities. I mean, one city was Buffalo, New York. There was 100,000 people that lived there. And when Charles Finney went there and preached, the entire city got born again. There was a time in New York City where they actually shut down the businesses from noon until 1 o'clock so people could pray instead of doing business. It so affected our nation, and these people then in the Northeast, as they saw slavery trying to go into the Western territories, they just wouldn't have it. Because we're Christians here. We don't do that. So we had a civil war. But you know, when we got rid of slavery, the South started manufacturing, and they became a major manufacturing base so fast that by 1900, the United States, this young nation, 125 years old, was the most powerful economic and military nation in the world. God gives the increase. See, and they recognized that. Well, about 1880, was some influential families started sending their children to Europe to be educated. And when those young men came back, it was mostly young men at that time, they came back to America with ideas of progressivism. You know, progressivism is just another word for secularism. We're going to get God out. But remember, whenever somebody tells you, well, let's secularize or let's be progressive, they're really saying, come and join us in poverty. Because God gives the increase. And so these men came back and they tried to bring that back to our nation. They brought it to our universities, and they did that, but they tried to get it in our government. But our Constitution protected us from that. We were a different people. That Constitution was written by the finger of God. That protected us. But as we got into like 1900 and those first years, of the new century, why something changed in the Christians. It wasn't that there were less Christians, but prior to that time, for 3 centuries, Christians had thought that they had a responsibility to transform the culture. Just like those first people coming from England with the Bible, they thought that, well, we're going to live like the Bible says, because that God has the solutions for our problems. We recognize that God gives the increase. So that's the way the affairs went in our nation. But these new Christians, they, instead of bringing heaven to earth, the good things of heaven to earth, they thought, well, man, we're going to go to heaven. So, how's that song go? This earth is not my home. I'm just a passing through. I got a great place somewhere beyond the blue. I can hear heaven calling right now from the shore, and I won't be at home in this world anymore. That's what they thought like. And if you're just a visitor here, well, then you don't try to transform the culture. So and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this, but this started a trend where Christians didn't even vote. And you know that you take any election, and starting then, 75% of the people that aren't born again, that are born again Christians, they won't even show up to vote. Can you believe that? See, so when Christians didn't vote, who do you suppose got to be our presidents and our senators? Who got in our Supreme Court then because they appointed them? Christians didn't vote. And so we've had 112 years of progressive takeover, really, because Christians didn't show up for the battle. And of course, I mean, we could talk about the negative effects on our country for a long time of that, because God gives the increase. But I want you to think about this. In in the year 2000, there were double the amount of Christians on earth as there was in 1990. See, we're living in the end time harvest right now. Double the amount of Christians. And in the year 2010, there were double the amount of Christians on earth than there were in 2000. Most of those Christians live in nations where they are persecuted for their new creation life. And the United States could stop that. We could have enough influence to stop that. So whenever we have an election in the United States, you got millions of Christians all over the world praying like a house of fire for the United States, for the elections. And then here, 75% of us don't even show up to vote. And then the 25% that do, there's not really a rhyme or reason to the way they vote. I mean, you'd think, just like when there was the First Great Awakening and these people had a new creation life, and so, man, we're different than they are in Europe, so we've got to have an independent nation. But now, I mean, Christians don't necessarily vote on what's important to God. So I thought about that. What is important to God when you go and vote? I mean, the kids, they used to have these bracelets, they don't so much anymore, but they'd say, WWJD. What would Jesus do? Well, what would Jesus vote on if he's going to vote? I thought about that. And, I found there's 3, for lack of a better word, I'll just call them institutions. There's 3 institutions that God set up to be a foundation for any culture, okay? And these are, right from the beginning, these 3 are found in the first third of the book of Genesis. 3 foundations. And foundations, I mean, are important. The foundation is the important part of the building. Well, let me tell you a short illustration of that, so you maybe get the picture. My uncle has got an old 2-story barn. He's gone now, but the barn's still there. It's almost 100 years old. And boy, some years ago, that barn had fallen into disrepair, and he asked me if I'd help him fix the barn so he could start using it. I think this is a little like where we are right now. And so this barn, it needed doors and it needed windows. and it had big holes that needed to be patched in the siding. But you know, the real problem in that barn, and why these other things had happened, was that the foundation had started to collapse. Back in the one corner, the foundation had given way, and that barn was just kind of sitting over. And then the weight of the building on the foundation wall was making it tip even more. And soon that barn would just sit right down in a heap of rubble. So before we could do anything with the barn, and of course none of the door frames were square or window frames because of this, why, we had to fix the foundation. So we did. I mean, we did a process of, we jacked this up straight and put railroad ties in, a whole series of them, and braced it, shorted up with steel cable. And then once we had the foundation straight, why then we could repair these other things, and now here it is, it's 20-some years later, and that barn is straight and strong. But had we not fixed the foundation, it would be a heap of rubble. So the foundation gets to be the important part of the building. And so these things are important to God. The first foundation that God set up was right in the beginning. It was the family. I always like if I can find what Jesus says about something. It just seems like His words carry weight. Over here in Matthew 19 and verse 4, some people had come to Jesus and they were asking Him, what is the definition of marriage? This was 2,000 years ago. You'd almost think it was today. But over in Matthew 19, verse 4, Jesus says this, "Don't you read the Scriptures?" I like that. That's it. He replied, "In them it is written that at the beginning God created man and woman, and that a man should leave his father and mother and be forever united to his wife. The two shall become one, no longer two, but one, and no man may divorce what God has joined together." So Jesus is defining a family, and it is a man and a woman, and the man left his father and mother, the woman left his father and mother, and then they got married together, the man and woman. That was a family. And that's in the first chapter of Genesis. God comments on this too, with a little more detail over in Malachi. Not too far back. Malachi chapter 2, God is talking to the men of the nation of Israel, and He says this, "You, these men, you were united to your wife by the Lord in God's wise plan. When you married, the two of you became one person in His sight. And what does He want? Godly children from your union. Therefore, guard your passions. Keep faith with the wife of your youth." In Minnesota, we're going to vote about this right here. What's the definition of a family? On your ballot, some of you might have voted early, but on your ballot there'll be it's the First Amendment there when it comes to the constitutional amendments. And it says that, do I want to define a marriage as only between a man and a woman? Well, if Jesus was voting there, I suppose he'd put yes, wouldn't he? That he does. Because of what he said. I've heard people talk about that amendment and that vote, and I think the argument, I think the question has been misunderstood. Because people say, well, I'm going to vote yes on that because homosexuality is wrong. Homosexuality is a sin. Well, that's not what's being asked there. See, we've already decided if homosexuality is right or wrong. Our courts decided it was right. And homosexual couples, they have full civil union rights. And they're protected by hate crime laws. So if you happen to have a negative thought about a homosexual couple, well, don't express that. You'll get arrested. Boy, I hope I'm not doing a hate crime right now. But you'll get so this isn't about somebody's rights. This is about, are we going to change 6,000 years of human history? I tried to find a civilization somewhere in history where men married men and women married women. And I couldn't find it until present day. Now, there's been homosexuality on the earth almost all this time. But no one even come up with that idea. And why do you suppose? I mean, it almost makes me irritated to talk about this because it insults my intelligence. I mean, for me to say that a man and a man, that when they come together, and a woman, they get together, and then that marriage is exactly the same as a man and a woman that are starting a family with the potential of having children, that's the same thing. I mean, I'd have to ignore science. I'd have to ignore biology, 6,000 years of human history, and everything I see in nature. So, did I miss something somewhere? Or have we advanced so far now that men and men can get together and make a baby? Or women and women can get together and make a baby? Because, the state of Minnesota doesn't give marriage licenses to give people a warm, fuzzy feeling or to make a political statement. They give marriage license to accommodate the orderly raising of children. And I just, but the thing about this is a foundation. So what happens afterwards? I mean, you can't point to anywhere in history where this has ever happened, that marriage between a man and a woman or between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, was considered just the same, because it's been a foundation, the family, for all of history. So what happens when that foundation crumbles? I mean, I don't know. But I think that's an important vote. And that will be on your amendment in the state of Minnesota. But you know that we've been voting on that in the last several national elections? Whether you knew it or not, if we were going to have same-sex marriage or not. Well, let me just take a little time out from this foundation and talk about voting a little bit. We live in a two-party political system. There's a chart back in the history room that shows all the presidents. There's not one third-party president in all of our history. Once in a while, you could find an independent senator or representative, or even a state senator or representative. But it's very rare. We live in a two-party political system, and so when you go and vote, if you don't, you're a born-again Christian. You go vote. Your vote is very precious. So if you don't vote for one of the two parties, you just wasted your vote. Whoever you voted for is not going to get elected. Some people say, well, I'm making a statement. Well, yeah, you did, but you're in a little dark cubby and nobody saw your statement. When you go vote like that. Or at least that's the way we used to do it. Man, now we do it in the mail and all that. But anyhow, nobody sees your statement. So you're going to vote for one or two parties. Now these candidates that run, man, have you heard some of the ads? Why? It's kind of entertaining, actually, because but how do you know that they're going to do what they're telling you they're going to do? Well, they're represented by a party. They get all their money to run for office, to do those ads from this party. And we've got two parties, and each party has a platform. And this platform, it's made up of principles that this party believes in. The party believed in the principles. And those principles got there because there were local caucuses on off-election years that you can go to whatever party and talk about what you want in the platform. And then they pick delegates to the county, to the state, and to the national conventions. So they're serious about these platforms, these principles. And those principles are actually called planks. So it's actually just what it sounds like. That candidate, when he's asking for your vote, he or she, they're standing up on this platform, on these planks, and they say, vote for me. Come on up here and stand with me on this platform, on these planks. We'll covenant together on these different principles. Okay? And of course, the candidates, they always talk big. They say, well, I'm not going to do what the platform says. But, well, you watch when their vote is needed. See, when it's not needed, when it don't matter, then they can vote any way they want on bills and stuff. But when their vote is needed for one of those principles in the platform, every time they vote that way, or else no more money from the party. So then they're done. So that platform really tells the way it is. And so there's a Democratic platform from the Democratic Party and one for the Republican Party. And I got these guys to put them up here. What do those platforms say about same-sex marriage? I think we got the Republican one first, if you guys get it up there. Okay, yeah. This is what the Republican platform says about marriage. It says, a sacred contract, defense of marriage. The congressional Republicans took the lead in enacting the Defense of Marriage Act, affirming the right of states and the federal government not to recognize same-sex relationships licensed in other jurisdictions. What that means, if two men got married over in Iowa, where it's legal to do that, when they come to Minnesota, then because of the Defense of Marriage Bill Act, why then we don't have to recognize that legally. Okay? That everybody follow that? Okay? So that's the Defense of Marriage Act. They've already done that. Okay, they put that into law. But listen, the executive branch of our government said they're not going to prosecute that law. They're not going to recognize it. So it's a law, but it apparently isn't so important. And then it says, we reaffirm our support for a constitutional amendment defining marriage as the union of one man and one woman. That's the Republican Party platform. So they want to do to our national constitution what we're doing in Minnesota. Vote that that marriage is from now on always, and it's been this way before, and it's going to be this way only between a man and a woman. Okay, so that's the Republican one. Now we got the Democrat one from the Democrat Party. Okay, here's the Democratic Party. Freedom to marry. We support marriage equality and support the movement to secure equal treatment under law for same-sex couples. We support the full repeal of the so-called Defense of Marriage Act and the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act. The Respect for Marriage Act would be just the opposite. If somebody gets married in Iowa, then we have to recognize that in Minnesota, even if it doesn't match up with our laws. Okay? But they support the marriage for same-sex couples in the Democratic Party. So, I'm not telling you how to vote. I'm like Fox News. I report, you decide. But I just want to let you know, because your vote is very important. Okay, that's good for those. So that's the first foundation of any culture, is the family. And so far, that foundation has stayed in place. I mean, it's been challenged. I mean, it's not good, some of the stuff that goes on between men and women when they're married. But at least it's a foundation. At least it still looks somewhat the same. Okay, the second foundation here, I'll start out in Genesis chapter 6. This is before the flood here. This is like right before the flood, and God's talking about the way things are on earth. This is 1/3 of human history before this flood. So in Genesis 6 and verse 5, it says, when the Lord saw the extent of human wickedness and that the trend of men's thoughts were only towards violence. I'm reading from the Living Bible here. So it's like every thought that anybody thought about was violence at that time. Boy, how would you like to live in a place like that? It'd be like, my mom's here today, and she's seeing me up here, and she says, there's something about that kid, I just want to kill him. That if every thought that men had tended towards violence, that would be the way it was. And then, look at here in verse 11 of chapter 6. It says, meanwhile, the crime rate was rapidly rising across the earth. And as seen by God, the world was rotten to the core, as God observed how bad it was and saw that all mankind was vicious and depraved. All mankind was vicious and depraved. These people were self-destructing here before the flood. So now I want to show you what God did about that after the flood. I'm over here in Genesis chapter 9, and Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives just landed on dry ground. So in 9 verse 1, God blessed Noah and his sons and told them to have many children and to repopulate the earth. Okay, that's the first thing He says. And then the next thing He says in verses 2 and 3 and 4, He says, all the animals I'm giving to you, and I'm putting you in charge of all the vegetation too. But then in verse 5 and 6, this is the second foundation. This is the foundation of civil government. See, before the flood, there's no record of civil government. There was no restraint. So every thought of man tended towards violence. So now God says, and murder is forbidden. Man killing animals must die, and any man who murders shall be killed. Listen, for to kill a man is to kill one made like God. We call that the sanctity of human life, and that is the basis of all civil government. The sanctity of human life. That means that human life is sacred, so you don't kill people. That is a foundation, the foundation of civil government. When you don't recognize the sanctity of human life, then you are on the road to the point where every thought of man tends towards violence. That's why it's important to recognize the sacredness of human life. You know, I was 17 years old in 1973 when our government decided we would destroy that foundation. That we would no longer recognize the sacredness of human life. And in the Supreme Court, it was called the Roe versus Wade decision. I was going to school at the time, so we had talked about it a lot. You know, they want to keep us up to date on current events and like that. And I think that after that decision was made, even a lot of the people that supported abortion were kind of looking up at the sky and wondering if it was going to fall or not. Because in our country, we had always respected the sacredness of human life. Well, of course, you know, the sky didn't fall. But 39 years later, every time I turn the TV on to the news, I'm hearing about another child that disappeared. Or I'm hearing about the body of the one they found that disappeared last week. See, that's what happens when you get rid of that foundation. You no longer respect the sanctity of human life. Pretty soon, every thought of man tends towards violence. Men become vicious and depraved. And because the sanctity of human life is the basis for civil government, you know, here we are in 2012. And our government, you know, if you count the money that we print, we borrow over $2 trillion a year. And we never make a plan for it. We haven't had a budget for several years. It'd be like if I went to my bank and I said, well, I want to just be able to borrow money here. Well, how much do you want to borrow? Well, I don't know, as much as I need. Well, what's your plan on spending it and paying it back? Well, I'm not going to make a plan. See, that is the sanctity of human life is the basis for civil government. Nothing makes sense anymore when that foundation is gone. So it's just like the barn. You've got to straighten up the foundation here if you expect anything to, you know, it'd be nice to get some paint on it somewhere down the road, but let's straighten the foundation right now. So what are there's two ways you're going to vote. We've been voting on this every election. Every election since 1972, we've been voting on the sanctity of human life. So what does the party say about this? What does the Republican Party platform say about is human life sacred or not? Here's the Republican Party. It says, we assert the sanctity of human life and affirm that the unborn child has a fundamental individual right to life, which cannot be infringed. We support a human life amendment to the Constitution. That amendment would go on the Constitution and say that we're not going to abort babies and we're not going to kill old people. Okay? Because see, when you no longer respect human life, see, if you're an unborn baby, well, you don't got too much to say. But after 39 years, why some of us are approaching the age where now people say, well, you're no good anymore. You're too old. So, go home and take a pain pill. We'll forego the surgery. This has consequences when you start destroying the foundation. So that's the Republican Party. They basically say no abortion, no time, no reason for nobody. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, Democratic Party platform. What do they say about God's foundation of the sacredness of human life? Okay, the Democratic Party strongly and unequivocally supports Roe versus Wade and a woman's right to make decisions during her pregnancy, including a safe and legal abortion, regardless of ability to pay. Well, what the Roe versus Wade law said was that anybody that wants an abortion can get one at any time for any reason, from conception until delivery. No, we'll never put any restrictions on that. So when you say you strongly and unequivocally support that, you're pretty proud of that. And it goes on to say that if they don't have the money to pay for it, we'll go to the people at Destiny Church and have them pay for it. Taxpayers. We're taxpayers. Everybody see, is that what that says? Okay, so there's a choice there, isn't there? When you go and vote, there's a choice. We got that. We got candidates that say, well, I'm not going to vote the platform. Well, there's one running right now in our district that always said that. Oh, I'm a pro-life Democrat. Well, not no more. They always, when their vote is needed, they'll always go back to that platform. Same way with the Republican. Oh, I'm a Republican, but I'm pro-choice. Boy, if there ever is a chance to come up, back when we were trying to ban late-term abortions, no Republican voted against that. They had to vote, or else they're no more party money. See, so anyhow, that's that foundation. Now the third, I'll take you to the third foundation, and this is Genesis 14. So we had one foundation right at the first chapter of Genesis. That was the family. Foundation of civil government was right when the new world started after the flood. In Genesis 14, the church shows up for the first time. And this is, I'll just read this. I'll start in verse 17, and then I'll explain the significance of this after I read it. So I'm reading verse 17 down to 21. As Abraham returned from his strike against Chedorlaomer and the other kings at the valley of Shavbeth, later called King's Valley, the king of Sodom come out to meet him. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, Jerusalem, who was a priest of the God of highest heaven, brought him bread and wine. Then Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing. The blessing of the supreme God, creator of heaven and earth, be upon you, Abram. And blessed be God who has delivered your enemies over to you. Then Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the spoils. The king of Sodom told him, just give me back my people who were captured. Keep for yourself the booty stolen from my city. Okay, this Chedorlaomer, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, he was the first emperor on earth, the first imperialist. That means he was a king, and so he wanted to conquer other kingdoms and take their goods. He was expanding his empire. So he made a mistake. One of the places he went to was Sodom. Abraham's nephew was there. So he had Lot, Abraham's nephew, and his family. He took them as captives, this Chedorlaomer. So Abraham got the men from his workers, and God trained them in military strategy, and they defeated these 5 armies, these small group of men. That was supernatural. Okay, so Abraham's coming back from there, and Melchizedek, he's the first representative of God on the earth. He's the priest, the representative of the Most High God. And he comes out and meets Abraham, and they have a church service. He blesses Abraham, he gives him communion, and then Abraham gives him the tithe. Well, some of that tithe belonged to the king of Sodom. And he was right there. He was at the church service. Because the king of Sodom, see, all of his city, all of his stuff was taken and all of his people. So he was right there at the church service, and he thought that was a good thing, that Abraham would give a tithe from the goods of the king of Sodom. Even though, Sodom was a wicked place, the king of Sodom was a wicked king, but he respected the church. He respected Melchizedek because he empowered Abraham to defeat this Chedorlaomer, because he saw the church as the preservative of his government. Remember when Jesus said that as Christians we're to be salt and light? So our government should see us as salt and light. Man, our government should be so thankful that born-again people are here, because we carry the blessing of God. We're blessed to be a blessing. We're here to keep the foundations in the culture, to keep things working right, to get God's increase on the culture. That's the role of the church. And the king of Sodom, this wicked man, recognized that. And he said to Abram, well, don't just take a tithe, man, take it all. I want you here. I want you here. That's what he's saying. So that's the third foundation, is the church. What do the parties say about this? Republican Party, in their platform, okay, this is what they say about this. We pledge to respect the religious beliefs and rights of conscience of all Americans, and to safeguard the independence of their institutions from government. We support the public display of the Ten Commandments as a reflection of our history and of our country's Judeo-Christian heritage. And we affirm the right of students to engage in prayer at public school events. Can you guys move it up a little? Okay. In public school events and in public schools, and to have equal access to public schools and other public facilities to accommodate religious freedom in the public square. We assert every citizen's right to apply religious values to public policy, and the right of faith-based organizations to participate fully in public programs without renouncing their beliefs. This is a long one. Removing every citizen's right... removing religious symbols or submitting to government-imposed hiring practices. I'm sorry for jumbling that up a little, but they're basically saying, just like the king of Sodom did, we want the church here. We respect what the church does. That's the republic. Everybody see that? Okay, let's go to the Democratic one. The Democratic platform. This one puzzled me. Because, no, why? Because, because I was watching the Democratic convention this last summer, and they had a big fight, actually. First, they took all mention of God out. They mentioned God in their platform one time in the previous platform from 2010. And then they took it out, but then they thought that might make people mad, so they put it in. They said they put God back in the platform. One time they said they put him in. And boy, that made some of them mad. Some of the delegates, they got up and they booed at God and like that. But it was in there one time. That's what I was told. So, man, I read through that Democratic platform, and there's a lot of pages. I went through it 3 times myself, and I was looking for God and I couldn't find him. And so I thought, well, this must be written for somebody that's smarter than me. So I got Andrew Smith to read through this, and he read through it all twice, and he didn't find him either. So I thought, well, I better get my wife then. So I had her looking for God in there. We didn't find him either. But anyhow, if you read that platform and you find God in there, well, I hope you'll tell me where it is, because it's got frustrating after a while. So that's what they say about that platform. You think, well, what difference does it make, really? If we, is it so important to hang the Ten Commandments up? Is it so important to pray in school? Well, I started first grade in 1961. I went to the Wendell Elementary School. It was grades 1 through 6. And at the school there, I remember being in first grade, because this is all new to me, I hardly ever got off the farm before I went to Wendell there. to school. So anyhow, it was a big deal, and so we'd get there and we'd be ready to go. We'd be sitting at our desk, and when the bell would ring, because we had a warning bell, so we'd go and sit down. When that next bell would ring, why we'd all get up from our desk. There's about 30 kids in every class there, 1 through 6. And we'd get up from our desk. We had a flag in the room, and we'd say the Pledge of Allegiance. The teacher would lead us in prayer, and she'd have a Bible reading for the day. I was in first grade. Now, in the spring of that year, this was another first for me. They come with these standardized tests. It's where you fill in those little black dots. Yeah, we thought that was fun, doing that. But the teacher said this the day before we was going to start those tests. She said, now you go home tonight and get a good night's sleep and have a good breakfast, because we're going to do this testing tomorrow, and that measures our academic achievements. And she said, in the United States here, we're number 1 in the world in literacy and in math and science. And boy, we want you guys to do good so we can keep on being number 1. Okay. So we did. We took the test, and then the next year we come back, same thing, second grade. We get up, say the Pledge of Allegiance when the bell would ring. The teacher would lead us in prayer, and we'd have a Bible reading. When we come back to school, after the Christmas vacation, that next winter, the teacher said, the Supreme Court, they decided that it was illegal for us to do this in school. But she said, we're going to do it anyhow. And so the rest of that year, same thing, we'd Pledge of Allegiance, and we'd pray and then have this Bible reading. But the next year, when we come back in the fall, there was no more of that. Well, in 1963, we were still number 1. Our students are number 65 in the world now, because increase comes from God. See, you don't. There's a couple ways to ignore God. One way you can do like that. Get him out of the public square. Another way is to just not do anything he says to do. And the thing is, here we are, Christians, born again people. I think I know about everybody here. Just looking around, I think I do. So I'm talking to born again people, and as Christians, there's less. The percentage of Christians right now is less than it was a generation ago. Talking about Christian adults, we're probably at 25% now. But if every Christian would vote, and if every Christian would, when they went to vote, they'd ask God, what would you vote about here, God? That we'd have enough of a voting bloc to not just determine every election, we'd determine every candidate that ran from either one of these parties. And we'd determine every issue that was talked about or decided about. And boy, it's if you let the foundation go too long, just like that barn, Boy, if that barn would have collapsed, we wouldn't even mess with it. It's too late, And I don't know where we are on that scale, but it's time to straighten the foundation. And here's the thing. What we thought as Christians, I'm just generalizing now. Why do 75% of Christians not vote? Well, I don't want to get dirty. It's so dirty. I don't want to get dirty. And man, I'm going to fly away. But then another thing we think is, these are intelligent people that we live around, and they're going to figure this out. When you see you move down from number 1 in the world to 65 in the world, they're going to see that and want to make some changes. What God says in His Word in Romans there is, once you start pushing away the truth of God's Word, your mind becomes dark and confused. It says in the Living Bible. The longer you do it, the less likely you are to figure it out. Our nation is totally dependent on Christians. Just like the king of Sodom was totally dependent on Melchizedek and Abraham. Our nation, to prosper and maybe even to just exist, is dependent upon us. And we have a wonderful, a supernatural heritage. It troubles me. Something that troubles me is because I like to read history some, but and I don't want to get to heaven and start reading history and say, man, it was all lost in your generation. I don't know. Yeah. And I want to get to heaven, and it's just like Pastor Steve said last week. I mean, man, we got these kids and these grandkids, and, man, I've been so blessed in my life. And I know a lot of you have too. Man, we are just... Did you see that video when we started out? I mean, we're so blessed. And that is just... it's just what's held over from when we worship God. I mean, 112 years later, and we're still getting some of the blessings. But boy, there's a time when that runs out. God says He'll bless 1,000 generations. Well, man, if you're the 1,001st generation, that's not good. I mean, we could control every election, every candidate, every issue, if Christians would vote and vote God's values. So we get a chance. I mean, some of you maybe have already voted early, and I know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but how many? I mean, you guys will go vote, right? Everybody here, you'll vote. I'm sure you will, and I know that you will vote God's values. But man, if you ever get a chance to talk to somebody that's a Christian and they talk about things, find some way to make sure that they know that too. They know what God values and like that. And so I appreciate you listening to me today. And like I said, I'm not telling you how to vote. I report, you decide. But there certainly is a choice.
When the Bible says that in my name they'll cast out demons, they'll speak with new tongues, they'll take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick and they will recover. Children don't have a hard time praying for people and seeing them be healed. Children don't have trouble with believing that. Well, this is kind of a new season in my life, and like Stan said, break out of that shell. I'm breaking out of a shell. I'd rather sit right down there and let Steve do all the talking. But I'm breaking out, and it takes a little, trying to crack that. I'm not saying I'm preaching a lot, but it's not as easy for me to do this. So I've been praying. I've told you before that, it's kind of a new season because my children have grown up. And it's like, okay, God, I loved raising my children, but now what do you want me to do? There's things that you have, and I've been praying about that. And I asked God just to show me some things. And this summer, I saw a cousin that I hadn't seen for years. He's a missionary. And basically, he provides support to missionaries, though. He takes mission teams around the world, and he puts in phone systems, in missionary bases, in camps. He builds or repairs things. And he said, I have seen so many things around the world, and I've seen people, missionaries around the world. And he said, I want to give you a book. And it was Why Pray? And it's about a missionary in India. And there in India, he says they're reaching thousands of people in home to home, and many of it is the children. I started reading this book, and there's so many children that are on fire for God and reaching out into their communities, and they're praying for the sick, and the sick are recovering. Over in India, you can't just go to a doctor, and so you have to be crazy enough to believe God's going to heal. You just have to have simple enough faith to believe God's going to do what He's going to do, or you're going to die, because there's not doctors in every community. There's a couple stories in here that I just wanted to share. There was a little orphan girl who asked her teacher. They have 10-day Bible clubs, and she asked her teacher, could you give me some of your material so I could teach some of my friends? And she said, I don't have any material left, but just a book or something. I don't have anything. So the little orphan girl went back to her community. She gathered 90 of her friends, and taught them everything she remembered about Jesus. And they said that many people got saved, and there was actually churches that started because she shared the love of Jesus in her neighborhood and to 90 other little girls. She was a 9-year-old girl. She was not a 15 or she was not even a teenager. So what a little evangelist. There's another story about Luke, a 10-year-old, after coming to know Christ through Children's Bible Club. He went back to his grandmother's house to break a curse off her. It was called the Curse of Thorns. 20 years earlier, a witch doctor had cursed her, and on every devil day, which was Thursday and Saturday, her grandmother couldn't walk because there was a pain that shot through every joint in her body. The witch doctor ruled the village through fear. Luke had seen people healed in his Bible club, and so he said, I'm going to pray for my grandmother. So he broke the power of the devil. He prayed for his grandmother, broke the power of the devil, and his grandmother got up, and she goes, well, there's no pain there. And she danced through her village, danced down the dusty street of her village. And all these people go, what happened to your grandma? What happened, Grandma? And she said, go ask Luke what happened. And so he got to tell everybody how Jesus is the answer, how Jesus came to set us free from sin, from sickness, from disease. He's an evangelist. He's a small child. He's a 10-year-old. And Jesus in Matthew 18 says that he called a little child to himself, set him in the midst of them, and said, assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as a little child, we lose, sometimes as we grow, we lose our simplicity of believing God and believing his word. And Jesus said, I say unto you, unless you are converted and become as a little child, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And so I just want to say, why we are emphasizing children today. Because God tells us to. He showed us his example. He brought the little child to him and blessed him. And he said, we need to become like this child. Why else? Because the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts. He put his love in there, and I can't help but tell people. I can't help but see people who need Jesus and children who are suffering and hurting in our neighborhoods. We need to tell them about Jesus. Why? Another reason, they can be our best evangelists. They can go back to their home and they can share the love of Jesus with their parents where they won't listen to you because they think, they just don't want to listen to adults sometimes. But a child can go back into their home and tell of the love of Jesus. They can go into their schools and share. That's why we need to reach our children. And because there's a window of opportunity when they're young. They have tender hearts before the world corrupts them. Heidi Baker, she's a missionary to Mozambique. She feeds 7,000 orphans regularly. She says, when she goes out, she goes, our children are our ministry team for our village outreaches. So when they go on village outreaches, the children come, and the children pray over everyone and share the gospel. And so I think that we are compelled by love, by God's love, by his commandments. We are compelled to reach those in our neighborhood. Sandra Fisher, everybody knows, if you come to this church regularly, that Sandra Fisher loves children. And she's asking, couldn't we get a bus and I can gather like 15 kids from my town? And I said, well, that would be awesome, and maybe we should do that. But wouldn't it be cool if every family reached out to their neighborhood and brought one or two? And we all mentored, because Sandra mentoring 15 and corralling 15 here, that'd be quite a job, wouldn't it? How many of you want to corral 15 every Sunday morning? Which we can do that, but, there's some in every neighborhood. There's kids everywhere, and God's going to open your eyes, and he's going to put this love in your heart. He's going to compel us, he said, to go out and get them. Compel them to come in. That means we need more workers here, too. And look at all the children that were up here already. this is a gold mine, and we need to be teaching and training them. It is the parents' responsibility to train their children. It's not the church's only. We're part of a support team for you, but we need help. So search your heart and see where God has you to be in this wonderful ministry. I asked Julie Kirkenwitz and I asked Chris Wagner if they would share. What's that? You're going first. Okay. So I'm going to have them just share. Julie has a testimony of being reached as a child. And Chris Wagner, I know she has a heart for neighborhood children. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Trish. All right. It makes me sad when I hear people say that they aren't called to children, because we are all called to children. If you read Scripture, you are called, you are commanded to reach children. And if you don't have the heart, this is where you start, is in the Word, and God will change your heart, and He will give you the compassion, His heart for them. I was reading this scripture. I was reading all these scriptures on children because I had been stirred in my heart about them. We often have 5 to 7 boys from our community over at a time, or sometimes it's more, and it's never little girls, which is sad to me, but it's always boys. But anyway, that's where it's at our house right now. So anyway, God is really, I feel like He is using us in our community with the children in our area. And the scripture I was reading, Jesus was talking, the disciples were walking down the street and they were arguing, who do you think He thinks is the best among us? You guys all know this, and I like it in the Message. He knew they were talking about this. They get back to the house, and then He confronts them on that. And it says in the Message, when they got home, the silence was deafening. They had been arguing with one another amongst themselves who was the greatest. And Jesus sat them down and said, so you want first place? Then take last place. Be a servant of all. And then He went and put a child in the middle of the room, and He cradled the child in His arms. And He said, whoever embraces one of these, as I do, embraces me. And much more he embraces God, my Father. So it is the heart of God. Of all the things that the 12 could have done, that's what He said is so important to Him, is that you embrace these little ones. And we have several in our neighborhood. I just talked to a lady, listened to a lady at a retreat last weekend. She lives in the small town of Staples. And she just, over the years, has adopted 9 kids just out of her neighborhood that were needy, just in Staples. We live in a community, and they're in your communities too. And we have, 7 right now that come and go and play at our house, and they most of them don't have a father. A couple of the boys that come don't have a father or a mother. And they come and play with our toys. Sometimes my boys aren't the most interested in playing with them. I'm just kind of showing you a practical what it can look like in your life. I should have backed up there. But so they come and play with our toys, and my boys, sometimes it's sacrificial for them to love on them and share their things and clean up when they leave. And it's just what we do for them. But they need to know that they have value. And that's what the scripture really talks to me. We need to show kids that they have value. We need to rally behind our kids. And when I say our kids, not just my own 4, but our kids in America, we need to rally behind them. And they need us rooting them on. You can do it. And they need us to be their cheerleaders. They need us to show them that they have value. And so when they come to our home, I do what I can to show, all of us do, to show them that they have a lot of value, that they are loved, and that they have a destiny in God. And we don't necessarily preach it at them, but it's just in our ordinary thing. So just practically, I think what you can do is show them they have value, and just do your ordinary thing, but include other kids. Look in your community and see what you can do to include them. Sometimes we're just playing baseball in the yard, and we'll just say, hey, come join us, and we had a little boy who, I don't like baseball. I'm like, why not? What don't you like? I'm a great pitcher. And one out of my whole bucket will make it to where it needs to go. But anyway, I try. And so here he had never had the opportunity to play baseball. So he just assumed he didn't like it because he had never tried. No one had ever taken the time to pitch him some balls. It just broke my heart. And so Scott got home, and he worked with him and worked with him. We're going to do this again tomorrow night, 5:30, same time. You come. I got the bat, and, he's like, get another glove. We need to, teach him this. And some children that don't have those opportunities, the little things, even though it doesn't seem spiritual, if it's baseball, if it's taking them to swimming lessons or teaching them a skill, it really builds their confidence, and it's showing them you have value. You're worth knowing how to swim, if it's paying for something like that. So do what you can and open your heart. God will show you. In our ordinary situation, it is kids coming and going at our house a lot. One thing I started at school, I thought if my kids are going to be at school, I'm going to be at school. And I started this Lego club after school, and many of you have heard about that. And so we just play Legos after school, and the first year I had about half the school sign up. And guess what? I know almost half the school, first name basis. This is our 4th year doing it now. They just come play Legos. It's not spiritual, but you know what? I just get to love on them. We learn respect one another. They learn to treat each other well. They learn to clean up the library when they're done. It's just a great testimony. We just love on these kids through that. Baseball games, like I said, when they're over and we're eating a snack or whatever, I just teach little nuggets as I can with these ones that are in our home at the time. Or they always hear worship music on, or sometimes I can, give them a little, you shut that off right now. Put it away. I'm sorry. My child has a phone on. That is against the rules. And I heard it. So anyway, we do not have it mastered at home. We are not perfect, but you know what? God will use us. I do not have angels, and I am not a perfect mother by any means. Jesus is the only one. But if I waited till I was perfect or my kids looked holier than thou, I would be waiting a long time. So do what you can. Do what you can now in your life, where you're at, in your neighborhoods, whether it's bringing them to church or doing something in your own home. If you're a grandma and you love to have someone over for tea, how many little girls in our church wouldn't love to go to a tea party at your house? I mean, just think out of the box what you can do to just love on these children. They need us rallying with them. All right? And I believe he puts us in strategic places. God didn't ask us. The Amish live in a little community, and, that's how they do it. God puts us, and for some reason with our church, we're all in these different towns, and I believe it's to be a light to our communities where we are living. Reach out. I really encourage you to reach out to the children. It is the heart of God. So, amen.
Okay, well, because of people like Chris and Trish and Sandra, I'm standing here today. And I've been involved in children's ministry since I was 12 years old. I won't tell you how old I am now, but But just think, when I was watching the kids sing, I was looking at Anna and Michaela and Danny, and I thought I was just a few years younger than them, and Jesus came into my life. And how it happened was, we lived, I guess, on the north side of Fargo, which was the scary part of Fargo. And my life consisted of fear, a lot of fear. And my mother had died when I was 6 years old, so there was a lot of rejection and abandonment. And my dad wasn't saved, and it was just not good for little Julie. And but we did go to church every Sunday, but it meant nothing to me. Maybe it meant something to Dad, but as far as I knew, it didn't mean anything to him either. And so, I just lived my life, and in fear and a lot of, what goes on along with fear, there's just a lot of icky stuff. So, and I was just thinking when Chris was talking about Christian people bringing kids into their home, if we don't do it, somebody else will. And we'd rather have Jesus get them than the enemy. And I'm very thankful for that. But my dad started hanging out with some people, and they were going to Assembly of God Church in Fargo. And one of the ladies asked if I could go to church with their daughter. And Dad was like, sounds good to me. And so at the time, and I believe they still do it, but a big bus comes and picks up the kids, and I got on that bus, and I went to children's church. And it was kind of unique because, like I said, we had gone to church, and I knew that Jesus was in the manger, but really I didn't know he made it farther than that. And it was interesting, really. And it was interesting. I was telling Trish that, that she's breaking out of the shell and, telling children's ministry to go on. And I just remember the children, the lady that prayed that prayer of salvation that day was actually Pastor Dan Rothwell's wife, Wanda. And I still remember all she was saying was that Jesus died and he loved me. And remember, I'm a little girl who felt rejected, abandoned, and fearful of everything. And this lady was telling me that somebody died for me and loved me. And I was like, whoa, I got to get up there. So I went and I asked Jesus in my heart. And if any of you know me, I'm very, talkative. But I went home immediately and I said, Daddy, you've got to go to church and you've got to ask Jesus in your heart because I did and you need to. And God must have been working on him because he went, I don't know if it was the very next Sunday, but he went shortly after and he gave his life to God. And so thankfully, because he did, it stuck with me because then I had a Christian daddy. And so, but then also in that Sunday school bus thing, every Saturday they would come and knock on your door and say, is Julie or whoever coming to church on Sunday? She was consistent. I still remember her name is Phyllis. And she wasn't even a bus driver. She was just a bus rider. But she was there every Saturday to see if I was coming to church. And even as an adult, when I've run into her sometimes, or even seeing Mrs. Wanda Rothwell, I'm still grateful to this day that those people gave up their lives for children because I gave Jesus my life and it stuck. And you have no idea, not to say, oh, this is what I've done, but when they invited me to church and when that lady consistently was a part of my life, she had no idea that I'd be involved in children's ministry from then on. And the reason is because I was a child that was taken out of the pit. So I believe that's why children's ministry is in my heart as well. But I've been a camp counselor. I've worked in children's church, gone to teach over in the mission field, even taught here at Destiny Academy. And there's just, you have no idea what the plan and purposes in these kids are, whether they're from our church or out there. And I just really believe that that God is good and he does have a plan and purpose for everybody. And I was just thinking about just looking at my own life and how the devil could have, he was out to destroy me, and God just didn't let it happen. He protected me. And the other day I was listening to Jenna, my daughter, she's 4, and she was singing a worship song that she had learned at school, and I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. And just the fact that I was taken out of the pit, and I married a godly man, Jason, and we have godly children that are growing up in the things of God and involved in this children's ministry, and it's a good thing. So just know that the kids here are being taught a Bible-based life, and if you are involved, you will grow. Your faith will grow because children teach us lots of things. And as the Bible says in John 10:10, I'm going to paraphrase because didn't have my readers on today, but it says the thief, which is the devil, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus said that he has come to give life and more abundantly. And children's ministry teaches the kids how to live life more abundantly. So.
And I want you to know that she can give you today a new future.
We hope this message has been a blessing to your life. A copy of this message and additional Destiny Church materials are available at destinychurchexit77.org.